Are you someone who either has a podcast or maybe you're looking to start one? The biggest lie when it comes to podcasting is that your podcast will grow by just having a podcast, and that couldn't be further from the truth. In this episode of The Department, we're going to be talking about how we've been able to grow this podcast to reach over millions of people all under a year, starting from scratch. We're going to be talking about some of the mistakes we've made and even some of the things that you should avoid, and also the things that we have found within this last year of podcasting. So let's get into it. Welcome to The Department. It's Omar and I have with me my bro, Art Mosqueda.
Yo.
So excited to get into this conversation. We've been wanting to do this conversation for some time. One being, it's literally been pretty much a year anniversary from starting this podcast.
Yes, almost. We're like, maybe a couple months out?
I mean, so we haven't really equated what makes a year, because we definitely hit a year on the calendar, but we haven't hit a year in episodes. So we aim to do an episode a week, and right now I think this might be 44 or something like that.
Right.
So I don't know, because 52 episodes would be technically a year. However, we started the podcast like mid-August, I believe, or September.
Yeah, it was mid-September that we started.
So cool. I'll just start off by saying my life and the people that surrounds me's life have completely changed. Would you say your life has changed because of the podcast?
Oh yeah, 100.
Just
in a skill set form.
Everything. Ripple effect of what the podcast, The Department. So number one, I just want to shout you out. If you're maybe listening and this might be your first one, welcome. But if you're a repeat or maybe a go-to listener of this podcast, I appreciate you. We appreciate you. It's been an incredible journey. We're going nowhere. I'll say that. But it's been so fun to be able to serve the people that I feel that I've been called to serve, and even just, getting the insight from all the experts that have been on and all those things.
I think that's been really rewarding and fulfilling. Would you say that
the connections?
Would you say that that's been the biggest thing is the amount of, I guess, fans that were created because
oh my goodness,
we've stayed consistent with it. All the people that come up to you and me, in person.
Yeah.
No, really cool.
It's been really cool. There's so much insight on why you should have a podcast. I don't want to go too deep on why having a podcast, because that's why you probably are clicked on this video. That's why you probably have a podcast or you're thinking to start one. So that you probably should. And we'll talk about maybe in a second, something cool happening. But I do want to preface this conversation with number one, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. We get so many views from people that aren't subscribers. And if everybody hit the subscribe button, we'd probably have 1 million subscribers, honestly.
Well, yeah.
Or close to hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, for sure.
But that would be cool. And then the second thing is I do want to shout out the Content to Cash Challenge. This episode is sponsored by the Content to Cash Challenge, which is an online event that I throw on through Zoom calls. And I actually just break down the entire multiple 6 and even 7-figure business model that I've created for you to implement in your business. So essentially, in 5 days, you're going to not only get Q&A with me if you sign up via VIP, but you're also going to get 5 sessions where I break down the whole thing. These have been incredible, and I'll put a link to it in the description or in the show notes. That is the Content to Cash Challenge. It's happening toward the end of the month in September. If you're watching this another time, there's probably one coming up. So go ahead and click that link. I did want to start this conversation with news that just recently came out. And recently, we have found out within the last couple of weeks that Alex Cooper, who has a podcast called Call Her Daddy, just recently signed a deal for $125 million with
SiriusXM.
$125 million.
I don't know what the time period of that payout looks like, but that is insane.
For talking.
Her life is changed forever.
For talking. For talking. What's the point of this? Just to show you that if you're putting in any energy and effort into podcasting and you don't feel like it's going anywhere, I just want you to know it's worth your time to figure out. It's worth your time to build that audience.
I think you made a good point though when you brought that up a few weeks ago, was that she probably had no idea when she started it that it was going to end up there.
Right.
And she just stayed consistent because she wanted to do it.
Exactly. I don't think Joe Rogan, before he signed his hundreds of millions of dollars a deal.
And then the Kelsey brothers too?
So then the Kelsey brothers, who are football players, AKA they're linemen, AKA they put their bodies on the line and their mental, or I guess their brains on the line. And they recently, because they have a podcast, signed a $100 million contract with Amazon. And these companies are seeing immense value, not just with creators and their audiences, no, with audience of podcasters. I think there's something to distinguish here, where if you're like a short form creator, the richness in your audience, as far as their buy-in, or maybe their how locked in they are in their episode, the fandom or the connection, the intimacy is not even equatable with podcasters' audiences.
Right.
So like, I know this is why I actually started the podcast. I started this podcast because I knew if I can build an audience, even if it was small, it'd be rich. It would be a rich connection. They would really feel like they know me. And so,
which in a year's time has come true.
100. Like people have joined my coaching because of it. People have said the podcast has changed their lives. Mm-hmm. People are listening to the podcast literally time and time again. So these are all things that are just proving it. But I just want to paint this picture. They signed what do you say, like a $14 million, $80 million deal?
So Travis Kelce, he signed a 4-year deal with the NFL, which is $57 million in total. So 14 a year.
Yeah. So $50 million to get his body beat around, to go to practice, to listen to a head coach, to run plays, to exhaust his body, to mess up his brain, and then $100 million to talk.
To sit in a chair.
And talk.
And hang out with his brother.
Yeah. And so it's huge possibility. I'm like, personally, just to let you guys in some insight, not only is it revolutionized our business, it's also, we're in talks with a company to do a really pretty significant deal for us, which we're so excited about. You'll know when it happens, but right now it just shows that like I didn't expect that to happen so soon, and I'm just excited. So that's just the value. I hope just sharing that story shows you like this is a great path to go on. However, you could waste your time and do the wrong things. This is a crazy stat I wrote down. And this is found on the internet. I mean, I think as a podcast expert says this, that 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. 1.8 million podcasts quit before they even get started.
Wow.
Like 90. Here's what's crazy about that. We started this podcast with shooting 4 episodes. So a lot of people don't do this. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking to start a podcast, consider just, carving out a season where you commit to just getting 4 episodes shot, so that you can create the margin so that you don't quit.
Before announcing that you have a podcast.
Honestly, you could, before you even announce that you're having a podcast, that's literally what we did. Like for a summer, last year, all summer long, I was just getting interviews in, and I didn't even know, I wasn't 100% clear on what the podcast even looked like. I just knew I didn't want to catch up or like the run out of episodes, I guess you could say. So I was able to start with some margin. And so consider doing that. And even if you maybe you're taking a break from podcasting, consider before you jump back in that you create some margin. But just so you know, you put yourself in the top 10% of podcasters. You put yourself in the top % of podcasters if you get past 3 episodes. If you have a 4th episode on your podcast platform, wherever you host your podcast, you're a top 10% of podcasters. I just want to say congratulations.
Bro, talk about the bar being so low.
It's crazy.
3 episodes.
It's absolutely insane that I can't think of too many things that you just do 4 times that you become at the top. I went to the gym a lot this summer, and I'm still the bar set really high, I guess. So the possibility to succeed is wide open. I just want people to be encouraged with that. But let's get into some of these reasons why people fail.
Yeah, so we have 3 of them. And I would say the first one is lack of intention and lack of care, or pre-deciding, as you would say.
Yeah, so the lack of intention. I find this with people who are successful in every area of their life where they found themselves successful. Mm-hmm. They didn't go into the thing to be successful how do I phrase this? Let me say this the right way. Like, it wasn't about the speed of the outcome, right? So it was more about the discipline of just doing something consistently over a long period of time.
Right.
So we could do this in the context of becoming a better parent, in the context of getting your health in order, in the context of getting your finances in order, and in the context of being a podcaster. It honestly, when I say, when we say lack of intention to start, I think it's like absorbing the identity that you are a podcaster. What do podcasters do? They podcast, right? Like, and it's just me desiring to, like, I just want to express my train of thought. Omar, what was your mindset going into starting this podcast? And I say this a lot, but my mindset was, I'm going to do a podcast until Jesus comes back.
Yeah.
So, like, regardless of the actual return, as far as like how fast the audience grows, or the things that I really can't truly control, how long will I do this for? Essentially, I said, I'm going to do this forever. So I actually had like I was settled in my heart to know that, like, regardless if this succeeds or fails, this is going to be a really fun thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just do it.
It's a commit first, figure it out later.
Yeah.
Thing.
And like, we'll throw up, like right now, Art will throw up a stat of our YouTube stats.
In a year's time.
Here's what I want people to see. I want people to see the flat line for the few months that we were posting weekly episodes until the uptick happened on episode 10 or 11.
Yep.
So, like, imagine that. People quit after 3 episodes, and then it wasn't till like the 10th episode that we were like, oh, something's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that mean if you do what we say that your 10th episode will blow up? No, that doesn't mean that. But what it means is that what blow up or what growth are you missing out on by quitting too soon? So what I can tell you is, if you quit, you won't be able to see what could have happened.
So good.
So if we were to quit at episode 3, dang it, man,
Yeah.
So I desire people that want to succeed in this to make sure that you pre-decide. So
yeah. So like, what do you mean? Because you have it written down here, when someone starts a podcast but they don't have a plan. Like, what does a podcast plan look like?
Yes, a podcast plan looks like I would say, if we can back up to what I was mentioning earlier, a podcast plan looks like, how many times do you want to show up a week? Do you want to do a monthly podcast? I remember following Craig Rochelle Leadership Podcast. He does 1 episode a month, and I think I found his podcast 2 years late as in he started it 2 years ago.
Right.
So I'm grateful and I'm glad he didn't stop his podcast, because 2 years after he started, I discovered it.
Wow.
And then guess what? Because he only uploaded 1 very rich podcast episode a month, I was able to actually binge his catalog. So I was able to catch up. So what does that tell me? That tells me that, like, just decide on how often you want to show up and be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we say podcast plan, it's like, let's just say you're going to show up twice a month. I think that's very fair for people to show up twice a month. And you could do a podcast by yourself. The reason, by the way, here's a little hack, like little inception hack. I'm going to teach the reason why I actually have my video person, Art, on this podcast, or every time I do a solo podcast. The reason I have you is so that you can re-engage the listener or the watcher. Number 1, every time you open up your mouth, it re-engages the listener. Number 2, I love having you on, and sometimes Mariella, because your guys' point of view. So, like, when I'm interviewing an expert,
mm-hmm.
I'm the audience advocate.
Right.
When I'm the one giving the game, you're the audience advocate.
Yes. Or I try to be.
Or at least you try to be. But you guys do a great job. But what's funny is people don't know that. So sometimes they click on a podcast like this. Bro, the last one I did, literally the hate in the comments of, like, they feel like I'm so demeaning to the team. But
I've never felt so seen, and like, just
oh my gosh.
It just felt nice to be like,
Bro, I'm shutting this down right now.
But it's crazy
honestly,
that people really thought you were attacking us.
Yeah.
But you're attacking the hypothetical person that we're mentioning or we're trying to bring up.
Yeah, and I get passionate about this topic, as you can notice, or maybe don't notice. Maybe you're like, bro, Omar, turn up the freaking, be more excited. I don't know. But I say all that to say, people, I'm like talking to the person I wasn't talking to you guys.
Yeah.
But here's why it is wise to have some level of co-host. Like if you can have at least one extra voice other than yourself, even if you're delivering, like we wrote the outline down on our phones.
Mhm.
So like there's structure here. But his insight, or anytime if something comes to his mind, it's going to be beneficial for the audience.
Yeah.
So that's why we
Yeah,
have.
it just adds a healthy dynamic and flow to a conversation
Right.
instead of you just being by yourself.
So talking about the podcast plan, it's like, okay, how often do you desire to show up? And then how are you going to show up? Now, what people typically don't realize is they can decide. It's crazy. Like as podcasters, as content creators, you decide how you wish to show up. And a podcast at its core is an audio conversation or a file. That's a podcast at its core. Now, I think when we say start with intention, you need to pre-decide if you want to build an audio-only podcast. Maybe you want to build an audio-only podcast and just film video for the use of social media.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about awareness strategy next. But you can also start a video podcast, right? So a video podcast is simply cameras turned on while you conduct the podcast. And I decided to go all in on video podcasting because I understand video, number one. Number two, I figured if we can just put out a very high quality piece of content every week on YouTube, that is a strategy for success. Like one super, super high quality piece of content on a YouTube channel once a week still is a great way to grow on YouTube, right?
Yeah, so you're talking about people setting an expectation for their podcast.
Yes.
And that's something they can keep up with.
Yes.
And stay consistent with.
Right. Because at bare minimum, upload your audio, bare
Right.
minimum. But then like if you're really trying to tackle the like YouTube podcast giant, then you want to do it the right way. You don't want to half horse it.
The whole reason for you giving these two reasons is because people like predictability when they like a show or when they like, like a channel.
Yeah.
They like to know what they can expect from you when you have a podcast or whatever.
Once you decide on like how you want to show up and how often you want to show up, you have to reverse engineer the workflow on how your podcast is going to be produced. So there are so many, you can have a virtual podcast. You can literally, I know somebody who's grown his personal brand, Michael Zuber. He's grown his brand $250,000 a year doing Zoom interviews, like essentially a podcast. He fills out his calendar with millionaires and then he interviews them and then he uploads that to his YouTube channel and he has an audio file. I don't think he takes his audio file and uploads it to podcast, which by the way, Michael, if you're listening to this, bro, you already have a podcast. But the workflow, do you want a virtual podcast where you conduct it just using a computer and a laptop and a microphone? Do you want an audio only podcast? Do you want an in-person podcast? Like what's cool about an audio podcast and at first making that the priority is like you can have a virtual audio podcast and most of the time people won't notice.
Right.
Now, I would say in-person energy can't be replicated virtually.
Definitely.
And so if you can do an in-person, run it. Like I was talking with one of my newest clients and he's going to rent out a studio that's in his local area to be consistent. Like he doesn't want to buy the gear yet. He just wants to make sure he can like get with the guests that he wants to have on and then conduct these podcasts and then come with a framework, a structure of the podcast. But he'll be consistent because he put that on somebody. He's like, I want a high quality video podcast, but for me to produce that alone is not going to happen. So I'm going to, pay for it. So
what's like a good guide for someone to choose? Like someone says like, Omar, I get what you're saying on these different types of podcasts I can start, but like, how do I know if a audio podcast is good for me or should I do a video instead? Or, like how does someone decide?
I think you decide based on your ability to accomplish it. Right. So like if it's too far of a reach for you to get in person, get a podcast shot and edited, like, but you want and desire to have a podcast, like don't let that part limit you. Like at its core, we can run a podcast with a phone like this.
Yep.
especially when you use like tools to like make it sound super legit.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't do this, but you can also start a podcast with wireless microphones. I'm pointing at this mic because literally we have a wireless microphone as a backup mic, but like we bought, I've been playing with these Hollyland mics. They're $140 and they can plug into a camera, a computer, or a smartphone. And then you can just clip on the mic. There's no extra, there's just
They're so simple, so small.
Oh, how about this? I shot a podcast with the sales girls on iPhones and Hollyland mics. And that podcast is crushing for them. So,
that was a really cool test you did.
yeah. But sometimes gear can get in the way. And that's why you said, like, how does somebody decide? Don't let the whole gear part get in the way from you just having a podcast. I just want to bring this back to your guys' attention. The way to succeed with the podcast is simply sticking with it. So if there's something in the way, an obstacle that prevents you from sticking with the podcast and showing up every week, I'll now give you a couple weeks. I mean, sometimes weeks get crazy and we just don't get to it. But like every week we drop a podcast, like that's your, or every 2 weeks we drop a podcast. That is the game. The game is just sticking with it. So, just intention. I think about Neil. So Neil, a friend of mine, Neil Dingra, he's been on the podcast a handful of times. And he told me, bro, I want to start a podcast, but it looks like the way you're doing it is really the best way to do it. I was like, low-key, it kind of is the best way to do it.
Yeah, because I mean, would you say a video pod is kind of the best form of a podcast?
Yeah, because
An in-person video podcast.
An in-person video podcast is really one of the best ways to get started because not so many people can do it. That's why. It's like golf YouTube.
So off the bat, it separates you.
Yeah, it's like golf YouTube. Like I think golf YouTube right now is going crazy, but it takes a lot to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
You need somebody to be able to film you for 4.5 hours. You need the ability to have the mics charged up, the GoPro in the cart, because this is the level that the YouTubers are doing it at. You need a drone. Like you need at least
you need like a
2
post-production
people.
like golf tracer to track the ball. Like
There's just like, so the barrier of entry is high when it comes to a high quality video podcast, unless you get access to a studio, which is that makes it easier.
Mm-hmm.
But when I say the barrier of entry, not everyone is willing to like even pay for those sessions.
Right.
So doing that, and then then it's like the intention stuff, which we'll talk about the secret sauce to YouTube and podcasting at the end. So stick with us. But yeah, that's what I would say. And Neil has already seen success. His YouTube channel was dead. And after I think 4 or 5 podcasts that we've done together, he's revived his YouTube channel and now it's cooking. And now he's getting incredible views for the amount of subscribers that are subscribed to his channel.
Yeah, and he chose how he wanted to start his podcast to sustain it.
Correct.
So
yeah, so I just think just know that this is worth your time. It's worth building. Like if you told me that I would potentially sign a 6-figure deal and this is bonus. If you were to tell me that YouTube would pay me over 40 grand from just Google, like these are things I didn't even consider. Now we're talking that within a year's time, a 6-figure podcast. What's crazy about Neil, by the way, is he too recently signed a 6-figure deal with a software company that he already used in his business. I'm not saying the podcast did it, but I think them seeing him like really legitimize his online presence with the podcast to include his Instagram and how he works it all together, I think it added.
Oh, sure. Like
it just
added
adds value.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't even realize, and this isn't a monetization conversation. By the way, there's a ton of monetization podcasts that we have. But I just want you to just know that like, if it doesn't feel like it's worth it, just know it'll click one day.
Okay, so mistake number 2 is no awareness strategy. So what does that mean? What is an awareness strategy?
No awareness strategy. Just because you have a podcast doesn't mean people either know you have a podcast, and it doesn't mean people will ever find your podcast, right? So when I say that, and we're talking about why 90% of podcasters fail within their first year, they don't think about maximizing the actual episode. When I say maximize, I mean like, okay, you got the podcast episode up. I know you feel super accomplished and super productive, but like now what are you going to do? Like you should just have like a flow to get the podcast out. You should be talking about your podcast. You should be sharing your podcast. You should be, here's a fancy word, repurposing your podcast. And so, but I would say a big reason why people fail, they quit because they don't see traction, and you don't see traction because people aren't aware of your podcast, right? So like, so what are you doing to get people aware of your podcast? And let's break down some of the things.
Or what can people do?
Yeah, what can people?
Yeah.
Here's what people can do if you're to bring more awareness to your podcast. Number one, turn on a camera, even if it's your smartphone. So like if you have an audio only podcast, turn on your smartphone and just record just you doing the podcast, and then you'll be able to then clip up the podcast. Here's what's cool. When I say clip up the podcast, I don't want to say words that are going to go over people's heads. You know, like when you go on social media, like Instagram and TikTok, there are clips from a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You're only able to do that if a camera was turned on during the podcast.
Sure.
Now, nobody needs to know that that you don't upload the full length video version. But by posting a clip, it could go viral. Your podcast clip can go viral and lead people to want to jump in and listen to an episode. And this is how podcast growth works. It works by getting one person at a time. When one person jumps on your podcast and you deliver, this is, I mean, dang, I didn't even put, people have like zero strategy within their podcast, but we could make sure you make a note of that. You know, just because I go to the gym, click on a podcast. I don't know if this happens to you. Go in a gym, click on a podcast based on the title, and they don't even get into whatever the title of the podcast was. So when somebody finds your podcast and they actually give your podcast a shot, are you doing what you're supposed to do to make sure that they come back? All it takes is one podcast to create a fan, you know? So I say all that to say, like, by posting reel, I think about, I got a million viewed clip from a podcast with Myron.
Yep.
I got a 2 million viewed clip from the podcast with Rory
Vaden.
I got a few 100,000 with Erwin. I got hundreds and hundreds and maybe millions of views from clipping up the podcast collectively. My Instagram grew from 30,000 followers to 100,000 followers from clipping the podcast, essentially at its core.
Yeah.
So now more people know about my podcast. So awareness, number one, turn on a camera in some capacity. And I think your phone would be great. Or, and if you're not ready to like post the full length video, that's fine. But turn on a camera.
But also, like, it doesn't have to be those super highly edited clips. Like, especially if it's just on their phone, they can literally just cut a piece out and just post it on their story, or like as a reel.
And I would say, like, if you haven't heard, there's an AI thing that there's a website called Opus Clips. So if you have the audio, if you have a video clip of your podcast or a video file of your podcast, even after you upload it to YouTube, you could throw it into Opus Clips, upload the file or YouTube link, and it'll give you 10 clips it thinks it will be good up for social media with captions and everything. So if you want to automate that. Now, AI isn't perfect, but that is a huge time saver.
Yeah. And it gives you like a starting point.
Right.
You know?
I think about, okay, so we're talking about awareness. So turn on a camera. Number two, tell people, show that every time you have a podcast drop, make it a big deal. Make it a big deal. You worked hard on it. Like, maybe you didn't, and that's another conversation for another day. You need to like put some energy and effort into this. But every time we have a podcast, I send out an email. Currently, I have close to 20,000 people on my email list. So I'm just getting them aware. That doesn't even mean like if they don't watch it or they don't listen to it, that's totally fine. I'm just getting you aware, right? But I'm sending an email. When a podcast drop, I'm posting a reel about the podcast drop.
Yep.
I'm posting on stories the reel that I just posted. I'm posting a little graphic. By the way, a really cool app that I love using to make like you look really cool online is called Mojo app. You throw your podcast image and then like put the words, and then it just does the stuff for you.
It like animates it.
It animates your podcast logo or whatever, and then I put a cool song, and then I link the podcast to the conversation, or I link on the story to the conversation. The third thing you can do is talk about the podcast. I've done this. I've driven traffic to a podcast by creating importance around the episode. So I remember one Saturday, and by the way, I'm talking about when you launch the podcast, but you can also do this like at any time. So like, be like, on the last podcast that I dropped, the guy that I was interviewing, his name is Daniel Priestley. I think he's one of the most brilliant minds. And this is me telling a story on stories, on Instagram stories, and he broke down 4 ways to get people off social media and into something so that you can let them know about your products, your services, or your offers and things like that. And I think it was one of the most eye-opening conversations for anyone trying to build an online business. And if you want to learn how to do that, just literally, DM me the word pod, or you can go to YouTube, search my name, or it's the department everywhere you listen to podcasts. Like just talking about it. And I love, this is something I learned from Neil actually. If you don't get excited for the thing, why would somebody else get excited? So if you're not excited about your episode, guess what? It's going to be really hard to get other people excited about your episode. So I think we're talking about bringing awareness. Why do podcasts fail? Because you think just uploading the podcast is doing that work. And like, yes, it puts you in the top 10% after 4 episodes. But if you want to scale it and you want to grow it and build the audience, you got to talk about it. And like I said, you did all the hard work. Another way you can get some awareness to your podcast is prioritizing SEO and or YouTube. What do I mean by that? The thing about audio platforms is that it's actually a cool thing, is that there's no algorithm. One of the only places that there isn't an algorithm is on audio podcast platforms, meaning if you subscribe to somebody's podcast on Apple or Spotify, when you upload a brand new episode, it goes to the top of that person's list. So like right now, I'm going to go to my podcast app because I do listen to podcasts. And then I'm going to go to browse, or not browse, I'm going to go to library. And then on my library shows the people who updated recently. If somebody updates every day, guess what? It'll show up at the very top of my list every day. Unfortunately, on YouTube, when you upload a YouTube video, it doesn't go to the top of everybody that's subscribed to you.
Yeah, it gets lost in the algorithm.
Right. However, you could leverage YouTube to get your podcast out there. And basic principles when it comes to the YouTube algorithm is making it for YouTube. Make your podcast for YouTube and not for yourself. And so most people that have a podcast on YouTube, they titled their podcast the name of their podcast. Mm-hmm. That's what they lead with. Then they put the episode number, which we do, but we put it at the end. And then they put like just the idea they talked about.
Yeah.
So like, shout out to Omar Foster who joined the program, and we were on a call today, and I was just letting him know like, hey man, nobody cares about our podcast titles. Nobody cares about what episode it is, honestly. But what people care about on YouTube is what they care about.
Yes.
So how do you get your podcast to be seen on YouTube? You position your podcast in a way that will land on somebody looking for that, quote unquote, that information, whatever that is you're talking about.
This also applies to the thumbnail too. Like people try and get artsy with the thumbnail and put an image they like.
They put the logo of their podcast in the thing.
Then the
episode number. Then they put like whatever they put in the title. And then maybe it's just like a wide shot, or it's just like, it's not following the rules of YouTube.
Yeah.
So when I say that if you want YouTube to promote your podcast, you gotta play the YouTube game, and we'll go into depth toward the end because that's the game we decided to play on that. But that is how you're going to get awareness, though, right? I mentioned Instagram a lot, but TikTok is the same thing. Facebook, if it spreads you too thin, just be consistent on one of the platforms, and you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised that the clip you didn't think would go viral will go viral, and people are there's so much that gets communicated on a podcast clip. It's like, number one, this is a podcast. Number two,
there's more to watch from this.
There's definitely more to watch. This is just a snippet from, whatever, from whatever conversation is taking place. And so it just brings awareness. If more people knew you had a podcast, your life would be better.
All right. The next mistake is no money plan.
Yeah.
So what was your money plan starting the Dept?
My money plan was that this podcast would funnel people into my world. And when I say my world, I mean my brand. When I say my brand, I mean
Your business.
I'm in my business, but in some capacity, it will just get them to me. It would expose more people to what it is I am doing. But when I say the reason why 90% of podcasters fail is because they don't have a money plan, what I'm not saying is that this is a cash grab. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is if you're putting in work and you're talking about a subject matter, having something on the back end or that sits underneath the podcast is just super wise and will be highly worth your time. And sometimes a money plan could be starting the money plan, which means what would starting a money plan online look like? It would be building an email list.
Mm-hmm.
Like anytime you can get people off of your platform, whether it's podcasting or YouTube or Instagram, and you can get their email and their name and their phone number, you can essentially do anything, right? So I would love for people to take some time to think about what could sit under a podcast. Like when I say sit under, I mean let me say it like this. How can you sponsor your own podcast? So I would say for a while, we didn't put the challenge ad in the podcast.
No.
Which now I have no problem. I love putting the challenge ad because now it's a reoccurring event. So it makes sense to put it in.
I don't even think we had an ad read to start with in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it was a couple months in, but I'm letting you know, like, we wish we did this, right? So it would have been cool if we had it, but I created a Google spreadsheet. It's not even a pretty thing, right? A Google spreadsheet of all the gear that we use to conduct this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And we gave that away as an ad read.
Yep.
And that grew our email list 9,000 people.
Wild.
Which is wild. And from that 9,000, I mean, I know one of those people are in the program because they told me, they're like, yeah, I was watching a podcast and an email, and then you sent an email about your challenge, and then I took the challenge, and then I jumped into your program. If you don't know what you want to do with those emails, that's totally fine. But think about what could your listeners benefit from with your expertise. Now, it doesn't have to be super aligned with the podcast. Not every podcast we shot talked about gear or content creation or whatever, but I do know people are thinking, Omar's stuff looks really good. It sounds really good. People are thinking that stuff. And so, so just giving them the opportunity to get the access to the doc or whatever, that doc took me like less than an hour to create. And then I brought 9,000 people into the world. So
yeah, I mean, it was almost a no-brainer for people, especially, seeing the quality of the pod.
Yeah.
But before it comes to like sponsoring your own podcast, it's also good to know that like YouTube pays you AdSense per episode.
I mean, if you're monetized, yeah.
Right. So like, what's the best way to do that? Because people know you can get paid off of YouTube. And personally, it blew me away when I saw how much the podcast was making when we started, on a monthly basis. So like, yeah, what would be the best way someone can do that?
By playing the YouTube game. The only reason why you will get paid from Google on YouTube is if you're actually getting views, right? And so it's not the easiest thing. I don't think that should be a part of people's plans.
Okay.
Like, it's almost like that started happening and we're like, dude, sick.
Yeah.
That wasn't like the money. In my mind, I'm like, regardless if I'm making a ton on, and I wouldn't even say that's a ton, like, right? Like, regardless of what I'm making from Google with my podcast, like the powers in the attention. If I can get a couple hundred people to listen to my podcast, to watch my podcast, and like get them off the podcast into my community, whether that, by the way, you can even start a community. Like, we know people in the program, they started a community, and then it's not like a big ask. Hey, do you want to join the community of my podcast? Like, some people will just 100%. And that's actually more powerful than an actual subscriber, because subscribers might not get the content. So
Even though you guys should hit subscribe on this podcast right now.
Please. I mean, if that's the reason why you asked the question, then that would be what's up. Please hit subscribe and just help us get to 100K, man. But
I mean, it's going to happen.
Yeah. I do want to tell this cool story about one of the girls that were in our program. Her name's Brianda. And
Shout out.
she started her podcast and she got it sponsored before she even started. And how'd she do this? She did this by, and this is just like, sometimes it just takes it's not even like hard work. It's just like smart work. She took her podcast idea and she just started asking people who had local businesses or even businesses that can help anybody. So she got a law office to pay for her equipment.
Whoa.
In exchange for just a simple ad read.
Hold on. I didn't even.
You didn't know this?
No. I thought she sponsored her own podcast.
No, before she started.
What the heck?
She got a law office to pay for the equipment that she got to do her podcast. And I don't know how many episodes she promised them.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, if you're looking to purchase the gear, start asking people, hey, would you like to be my first sponsor of my podcast? Is my podcast is about, we would give a dedicated ad read in the podcast. And then we can, set up a link system, yada, yada, yada. Like, I don't know, whatever that could look like.
That's crazy.
Crazy, right? Hey, question for you. What would your business look like if it got the attention that it deserved? You probably wouldn't even have a business problem. Most people don't have a business problem. They have an awareness problem. This is why you're invited to join me on the next Content to Cash Challenge that is coming up. In 5 days, you're gonna be getting the system that I have implemented in my business that's allowed me to be a part-time 7-figure entrepreneur. Yes, because I built my personal brand online, it's opened up opportunity. But more importantly, it's given me more time to spend with my family and my community. The link to join this challenge is down in the description below. And I want to encourage you to take the VIP experience where I'll be doing 1 hour of Q&A every day of the challenge, and nowhere else do I avail myself in this capacity. And so I hope to see you on the Content to Cash Challenge coming up. And so that's a possibility, man. Like, you don't need a big audience to sponsor what it is you're doing. Just hope that breaks that limiting belief. And then another money plan is something I knew going into it that would happen anyway, and that is affiliate links. So what's an affiliate link? An affiliate link is a link that is created specifically for you. And then if somebody clicks that link and does the thing, buys the product, jumps into the program, signs up for the thing, you get a payout or a commission from that, right? So I mean, I wish I did the numbers better, but between all the episodes that have affiliate links in them, I don't even look, but it might be upwards to $10,000 to $15,000. I remember Myron's people reached out like a month and a half later from the first interview we did, and they're like, "Hey, Omar, just reaching out because we saw that there's money. You need to like connect your bank account to the thing." We're like, "Cool," and it was like $5,000. I was like, that works. Like that Google AdSense didn't add up to 5K on that video.
Right.
Which is cool, right? So yeah, of just having the foresight, to know and have these things in place. Be thinking about this. Like I wouldn't say I wouldn't, but it'd be just like, why not? Like, especially if your podcast is like long, if it's longer than 15 minutes, a 30-second ad read won't hurt anybody. Now, there's this whole wave right now where people are signing sponsorship deals on a podcast. I don't know if you hit a podcast on like Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen, and there's like 4 ads before the podcast even starts. Mm-hmm. Like, talk about like kill your brand. Like, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But we just put the ad inside of the actual podcast itself, and dude, if people will raise their hand if they want it. That's it. I mean, that's all an ad read or an offer is. An offer is like, not even an offer is an opportunity. So if you don't give it, you either rob yourself from the opportunity or you rob other people from an opportunity. So with that being said, join the Content to Cash Challenge. And I believe your life will never be the same from this 5-day experience. So those are 3 mistakes, but I do want to get into how we blew up this podcast with YouTube.
Yeah. After 10 episodes in.
So within a year, I just want to go on I'm on YouTube right now. I'm going to put the views. I don't know if the phone will allow me to do from the custom. It doesn't. So 2024, I got 1.6 million views. Just this year, we got 1.6 million views on the podcast. And then last year, taking into account all the things, but essentially got over 500,000 views. So we're well over 2 million views on the podcast. And I want to talk about how we were able to do that. So if you guys don't know, I have a background on YouTube or with YouTube. I created content for a channel on YouTube called Think Media. Maybe many of you guys recognize me from there. Maybe you don't. Maybe this is the first time we met. Hey, that's awesome too. But I created maybe over 300 videos on that channel, not to include videos I've been a part of in collaboration and behind the scenes. But like with my face, I think there was 320 videos or something like that. Those videos equated to over 60 million views and have been a part of growing that channel from when I started helping and assisting from about 50 or 60,000 subscribers all the way to 2.8 million subscribers, which is when I stopped creating for them. So it was a really fun season and I learned a ton. I've also helped other people and businesses grow YouTube channels. So I know a lot of YouTube, and the reality is YouTube, it really is a skill. And fortunately enough, I was able to apply my YouTube know-how and my skill on this podcast. But would it be cool if I just break it down and let you guys have the game?
No, I mean, I think we can save it for the next episode.
All right, we'll save it for the next episode. All right, just kidding. Okay, let's go into it. So the first thing, how to grow a podcast on YouTube, it starts with knowing what the podcast is going to be about.
Okay.
Like if you have a podcast and it's just a random conversation, if it's a creative outlet, by all means, like get that creative outlet out, and that's cool. Just don't expect it to grow. Okay. The only way to really grow a podcast on YouTube is to properly package conversations in a way that appeals to somebody looking for that information. So this is why I always like to tell people, make sure your podcast has a North Star. So like we have over 40 episodes. Every episode that I have on this podcast has a North Star. But Omar, what if you wanted to talk about like life? I mean, there's other places for that. Like, but if you want to grow on YouTube, you gotta decide. And this is why here's what's cool about this thinking. This is why I love having repeat guests. Because I know that this one time we sit down, we can talk about this subject. Mm-hmm. Like with Neil Dingra. First episode, we talked about how he was able to build his business, a 7-figure business with organic following.
Yeah.
And that podcast did really well. I think it's at like 60,000 views. Then I see Neil throws a killer 1,000 person event, and he throws events he's so good at virtual events, Zoom calls and webinars. He's so good at workshops. So then we did a conversation with Neil, and it does help. He does live in Vegas, but did a conversation with him specifically about events, how to start and scale events, any capacity. And that was just, dude, that every conversation is a masterclass because it's about one thing. And this gives you the privilege to have people back again. And then here's what it also does. This is going to help a lot of people. It also gives you the ability to not have to have people who are known. So you don't need to be famous to be on my podcast. You just need to be good at what you do and know how to articulate it. So, for example, I've had people who have been on my podcast, and I've seen them on other people's podcasts with way bigger audiences.
Yep.
And my podcast performs better.
Yep.
Because I know how to package the conversation. It's all down to packaging. And so you just want to know it's North Star. Another word for it is a big idea. What's the big idea of this conversation?
Or main idea of the conversation.
Right. So yeah, I mean, so for this one, the main idea was podcasts. So like, but within it, now we're getting into YouTube strategy. But if I led with YouTube strategy, it would be a different North Star. So like the North Star of even just this conversation in and of itself just proves That's why you're so locked in and you're still listening and watching, because the very title is being delivered throughout this conversation.
Yeah. That's what I mean, when you asked me to do this solo episode, I was actually excited because I feel like you've just unlocked so many things with podcasting because of the year of experience that you've built with your own podcast, and just to see like how true it is. Like the last episode we dropped with, you know, Cassandra, it was so interesting to see your podcast versus other people's that had her on, and just the difference in view and engagement. Like this stuff is real and people don't value it, which is crazy.
Yeah. And that's the part where it's like, if you're willing to go the extra mile, it'll be worth the times. So here's what's cool. Like, let's just take Cassandra as a great example. She probably said essentially the same thing on both podcasts.
1000%.
Yeah. Okay. So then why did her episode with us, which right now, and it's performing 1 out of 10, which like on YouTube, if you're consistent posting videos on YouTube, it ranks the performance out of the last 10 videos you dropped. Her video is ranking 1 out of 10. And within the last 10, I mean, I've had incredible guests, incredible podcasts. It's not to downplay it. It's just to say the idea is very pertinent to an audience of people that are looking for this very thing. And she essentially talked about how to, you know, start or do community, like paid community groups.
Yeah.
But that's not even the North Star. Like the North Star is monetizing your content. That's the North Star. So like, I think the podcast is called like a genius way to monetize on social media. And then it's like online community. And like, what's cool is the feedback in the comments. There's a brand new people that are discovering Omar, and they're also discovering Cassandra, but back to kind of the awareness. So this is helping the awareness of the podcast. People are subscribing. I think we've grown 600 subscribers so far in less than a week on just one conversation. And then you just multiply this strategy over and over and again. It just compounds. It's crazy. But North Star, number 1. Number 2, the title. And number 3, the thumbnail. So like, you want to make sure that, and I mentioned it earlier, I don't want to go too deep, but like your title of your podcast on YouTube, it can't be the podcast name, the episode number, and then just like random words. No, it's gotta be like a YouTube video. Go on your YouTube app and then just search, and just not even search, just scroll and see how things are titled. So I'm actually gonna do it. Like, why not? I'm gonna pull up YouTube real quick. Okay. I'm gonna go to my home feed, which is where people are going to see my content. They're gonna see it on their home feed. So then I'm gonna refresh. Actually, you can click on the podcast tab. All right. Why Benny Blanco changed the title for Justin Bieber's hit "Love Yourself." Okay, whatever, random. That was I don't know why it showed up on the podcast name, but Howard Stern.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah, by the way, make sure you upload your podcast on YouTube as a podcast.
Yes, that is like a new thing that YouTube,
so that you can even show up on this podcast tab.
Yes.
Like if you open up the YouTube app. The next person I see is my boy Lewis Howes. Nicky Jam on struggling with panic attacks and PSD. My soul was dead. He puts in quotes. But like panic attacks and PSD is like the key word. We got Ruslan. Bless God Studios is his channel. Chicago gangs press Venezuelan for okay, that's a hard one to actually read. He put a star asterisk. I don't know if you could use the word gangs. I don't know.
oh yeah, it's probably, yeah.
Okay, here's a good one. Ramsey Show. Yes, take a HELOC for that.
What?
HELOC is a home equity line of credit.
Oh.
But what am I getting at? Like, you want to none of these titles say the podcast name.
Okay, so I mean, people, like you just said, people know that you have a lot of experience doing YouTube because you did it for so long. But like, what are some practical handles for people to like package their stuff well? Because this can seem very intimidating especially when you make coming up with the title so easy, and it's like so,
yeah, no,
like,
I think
dialed.
I think the practical thing is to just pay attention more. Like, I think sometimes where most people aren't they're consuming from it. It's the point of view they're consuming from. So like if you're on YouTube or if you consume content in any capacity, and maybe you're somebody you're like, I don't watch stuff online. Well, do you read books? Like book titles? Do you read articles online about stuff?
I really love that piece of game that you give about the article thing.
Yeah.
It's just is so good.
Yeah, it's like if you know you're gonna do a podcast on something, give me a topic.
Real estate.
Okay, if I'm gonna do a podcast on buying, becoming a real estate investor, I'm just gonna put real estate investor article.
Okay.
And then I'm just gonna search and see how Google serves me articles about becoming real estate investors. And like what people don't realize is there are people that actually went to college to learn how to write headlines, and headlines do great for YouTube titles. But nothing matters if you're not paying attention.
Okay.
So like there's many times where I'll see YouTube titles and I'm like, I love that title. Like I'm going to reuse that title for me.
Oh, okay. So it's just being self-aware of like why a title stuck out to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I say changing the perspective of how you see titles, so like one way to see a title is like, I'm looking to be entertained. Like right now we watch this like guy who does like van life and like boat life and whatever life. His name's like Ryan Townsend or whatever. I don't know. Great YouTuber. I watch his stuff to be entertained. But then there's a lot of content that I love learning on YouTube still. And so when I see a title that really strikes me, I like mark it down. I write it down because I'm like, shoot. And a lot of times it's just plugging in your word for that awesome title, right? So like you said, real estate. What was like Myron's? Myron's incredible at titles. I'm going to go to Myron's episode with, all right, how to be an oversubscribed boss moves millionaire. Okay, so how to be super successful in your first year of real estate investing, or guarantee success in your first year of real estate So like I got 80% of my title by just reading his title.
Yeah.
So it isn't best practice to just like copy paste, but you can find titles from other people who talk about other things on YouTube, longer videos, shorter videos, and just repurpose it for your podcast.
Right. Like, I mean, everyone stole that one. I think it was like 15 years of business.
Oh yeah.
Or no,
great. 30 years
30
of
years.
business advice in 2 hours and 26 minutes. Yeah.
Like literally every big name on YouTube has used that title by now.
Yeah. So people are catching on this strategy. This is why like the people think, and it is like it's oversaturated. More people are creating content. More people are creating content consistently. More people are creating higher quality content. Like it's insane. Like if I go on Instagram right now, I used to be the only person with a blurry background. Like now it's like, it's just more common. More people have gear so they can create. But what you have to believe is like, because of the increase of saturation creates I guess you could say the barrier of people who are really serious. So there's still this is now the new, what was this? I don't know if this makes sense. Like, but you're not, if you're listening to the audio, it's like before it was like, dude, if you just made videos and you just showed up, that was the barrier of entry.
Yeah, it's the concept that Dan Martell talks about. It's easier to be pro than it is to be amateur because it's so less crowded being a pro. And amateurs it's just filled.
Dang, dude, you did not have to give him credit, and that kind of just came from you. That's actually exactly what I'm trying to say, though.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, honestly, it's that. So like, if you decide to be pro, pre-decide, have the intention. But yeah, YouTube titles, and then the thumbnail, you just want it to complement or contrast the title.
Oh, okay, hold on. I want to bring something up because I think this is really good and it's good for people to hear. But for the people who have a podcast and are doing their thing and they have the ability to hire out positions, as in like post for me or write this title, that stuff. Would you say it's a good idea for people to delegate the packaging of their YouTube videos or their podcasts?
That's such a tight question because initially the answer is no.
Why is that?
The answer is no because nobody knows the content more than you do. As the creator, as the orchestrator, as the as the core of the content, how can somebody reinterpret what you intended with their perception of what actually happened?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, but Omar, I mean, it's important to buy back your time and like, you know.
yeah, you know what's more important? Or you tell me what sucks more. Having podcasts that tank and don't grow, or buying back your time
by having something perform well. Bam.
So you tell me which one's harder.
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this ever on a live, like on a podcast that people, I was hanging out with Myron on my birthday. That's
specifically
a flex.
golfing.
We were golfing, and that's a flex. Okay. He called me. That's a flex. But he was on the phone with his video person. And his video person, her name's Marima. And
shout out Marima.
And yeah, and she was just like, yeah, hey Myron. So we uploaded the, you know, the video that's gonna drop tomorrow. And Myron's like, cool. I'll go in there and put a title. And then I look at him. I mean, he's driving, and he's like, maybe he's on Bluetooth. He was on Bluetooth. He wasn't talking on the phone. And then I was just like, my gosh, this guy who has made tens of millions of dollars decides his YouTube titles. He gets off the phone with Marima, and I was like, Myron, you don't know how happy that makes me that you are still doing the titles of your YouTube videos. He's like, how can anybody title my videos
better than I can?
Better than I can. I was like, bruh, you know how many people are like, let me just have somebody do it. I think what people can do for you is the thumbnail. I do think you can jump into a program, shout out to the Inner Circle program, where you can process your video ideas, where you can test titles, where you can ask people what they think. Like, that's good stuff, and pay people for that stuff. But like, at its core, you know it more than anything. Why would you let somebody else title your book without actually like helping you get there? Right? So like, I mean, if you suck at titling stuff, that's one thing. That's why it's a skill. You need to grow in it. But like, you know more than anything what this conversation was about. Like, even when you're in the room and you're hearing the conversation, dude, this could be packaged a million different ways. And you don't have even direction until I give you the title. So it's like, I'm wasting your time, talking about buy back your time. Like, I'm wasting your time and making it more stressful by not just telling you, hey, this is what the conversation is.
Yeah.
It's about monetizing. It's about creating an offer. It's about building your personal brand. Like, once you know that, then you can run, you know? But I think, yeah, it was really good that we said that, because I have a lot of entrepreneur friends that have media teams, and they got people that do their stuff.
And they just want to push it to, you know, their team and have them do it all.
And then they wonder why my stuff performs better than their stuff.
Yes.
And it's like, bro, because you don't pay me. No, I'm just kidding. It's like, it's because you lack intention. And most people that maybe they have a foundational audience, or they've grown their audience, it started with intention, and then you got lazy. So here's another reason why the opportunity is wide, because people quit every day.
Right.
So like, there's people that like, they're old news now. And so by you coming on the scene, you can blow up the scene because you're coming with like full force. You got the game on this podcast. This is a stinking masterclass. My goodness. And you shouldn't fail because of it. It's this multiplier. Like, the secret, I won't even say the secret. The way to succeed online is this multiple: consistency times intentionality. If you can maintain consistency and stay intentional, what does that mean? That every time you do something, you revisit it, and you're like, how do we do this better? How do we tweak this? Like, consistency, intentionality, consistency, intentionality. And so, yeah, our first podcast that went really well was Shalene Johnson. It was episode 10.
It was kind of an accident, but then you quickly realized, and you reverse engineered why.
Yeah, I was intentional.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, it was our 10th episode, meaning we were consistent for like 10 weeks. And then when that one was performing really well, I was in, this is so funny. I was in Cabo, because I really was. I was in Cabo, and I was like, dang, this is like, every time I was refreshing the page, it was like 1,000 more views.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, why was this successful? And I broke it down. And at its core, not to get too into it, it had a really aligned intro to the title and thumbnail. And then we just got right into the conversation. There was no
intro being the first 60 seconds of the actual video.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I learned that you can create podcasts that have a masterclass style, and it takes the host or the organizer of the conversation, or the architect, I guess you could say, of the conversation, to carry on the conversation in a format that's answering questions that would be answered in a course. So if this is a conversation about how to build your personal brand, let's define what a personal brand is. Why should somebody even build a personal brand?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where can people get started? What are some of the things that people do mistake? And like what people, here's the number one thing we get on our podcast. This is my 3rd time listening to this conversation. This is my 5th time listening to the conversation. This time I'm taking notes. Like, talk about repeat viewers of hour-long conversations. That's so powerful. Like the videos I used to make for Think Media, they didn't quite have that power.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was because I made very practical content that just helped people sing in a single moment. But this is why podcasts are very powerful. And it's because there's so many nuances.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. People grow. But if you can create content that transcends time, people can consume it at different times in their life and get something different out of it.
Yeah.
So if you watch a podcast and you get some insight, and then you apply some of the things, and maybe you join a coaching program, or maybe you invest in yourself in some capacity, and then you listen to it again, you're a different human being listening to it.
Right.
Now, that doesn't really apply too well with tutorial-based content like what I used to do.
Mm-hmm.
But because podcast is so rich, you'll get something different because you're different. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it reminds me when you read Alex Hormozi's first book.
Oh yeah, dude.
And
come on.
And
come
you
on,
knew
somebody.
it was good. Like you knew the information was good because it came from Alex. And he was talking about, I think it was the Offers book.
Yeah, $100 million offer.
And you just didn't understand it though.
Nah.
And then you revisited the book after you had, continued in your business, came up with an offer, and then you read it again and you were like, okay, wait a second. This is gold that I just discovered and I'm going to apply it in my business now.
Yeah.
So
no, it's
it's the same concept with like people coming back to watch the podcast.
Yeah. So yeah, that's how we blew up the podcast on YouTube.
Mm.
And I would encourage anyone listening or watching still, number one, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe.
Smash that
and shout out to the Content to Cash Challenge. Thanks for sponsoring this video, Omar. I appreciate you. One of our best partners, Omar Art.
What is the Content to Cash Challenge?
Dude, I'm glad you asked. The Content to Cash Challenge is a 5-day virtual event. If you sign up for a VIP, you will get 5 hours of Q&A, an hour a day of Q&A with me. And then I also teach one very key lesson every day. And it's a powerful time. I could sell a course, but I like to journey with people. And so you're going to get so much context for your situation from my expertise. That's the Content to Cash Challenge. Check out the link in the description. But I would say with breaking down what we just did with YouTube, I would just want people to make sure you just decide on a platform to crush. Like if YouTube is the main priority, just make it the main priority. Don't forsake not uploading the audio onto a podcast hosting platform. But if you're growing your audio podcast, and that's like what you want to grow, which is so powerful. Here's what I found with audio podcasts, by the way, is when you get somebody to subscribe to an audio podcast, they become an avid listener. It's just one of their, it's just one of their routines to go through their podcasts, every week. And then
you know what? It's almost like when the podcast drops, it pops to the top of their feed.
Exactly. So
and they want to listen.
So, but if you really wanted to grow your podcast audibly, then maybe your goal is to kill it with vertical content and with email marketing and just to bring awareness to your podcast.
Some last thoughts. We're definitely talking with the tone of people who want to start. And I guess
Oh,
what,
dude.
what would you say to people who have been doing it,
Ooh.
who have stayed consistent? They're still not seeing the results they want to see.
Oh, dude, so good. Well, number one, I'll say, if you've been consistent,
Mm-hmm.
you can give your channel on YouTube a facelift.
Ooh. Okay.
So what does this mean? This means with everything you just learned in this podcast, you can go back, retitle, rebrand your thumbnails, clean up your thumbnails. You learned, like, you're probably like, shoot, you guys were talking about thumbnails and like I have way too much stuff in my thumbnail. Yes, you do. So like go on Fiverr.com or come up with a look for your thumbnails. You know what? There used to be a time where you actually had to like create thumbnails that made people like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know you're gonna like lock in and be consistent with your podcast, you can have a look. Like people know it's yours. So like we run with like the yellow box, the black text, and
White
like
text.
the big face and the white text.
Yeah.
And so like at this point, 40 episodes in plus, you just know it's us.
Sure.
So
actually, what's interesting is I remember you tried a different style thumbnail for a solo episode and it tanked because people essentially didn't know that it was you.
Yeah, and I was trying to follow a trend.
Yeah.
So if you want to skip out on trends, just decide on a look, and less is more. Face, words, colored backdrop, or whatever.
I mean, if you look at our thumbnails, they're
the
so simple.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say go back and
that's actually a great piece of advice because most people probably don't know that they can retitle an old video that's already posted. Yeah,
it's called a channel facelift, and it can bring an increased amount of views because now YouTube is gonna serve your old videos, which is possible, like which it can be huge. Update your links, especially because if maybe you got old with your links or lazy with your links. This happened with was it Chrissy, the like ladies coach?
Oh yeah.
So they learned that they can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So they went to a conference and they're like, what? We can like update our thumbnails and our titles, and now we know that we're supposed to change the titles, right, and whatever. And they did that, and they like added subscribers in like a couple months, like thousands of subscribers from their old videos,
right? Just
because it was repackaged. So if you've been putting out podcasts consistently, I would say just increase your intentionality. Somebody that just joined the program had a podcast, and from learning from how how I've coached him through dialing it in, he comes more prepared, and it's not so much of a waste of time. It's like it's very, and even the conversation of it in and of itself is intentional. The amount of times I click on a podcast, I forgot to mention this.
This happened, I think, 3 times with you, but you clicked on an episode that you were actually excited to watch, and
not more than 3 times.
But what, 30 minutes, 45 minutes in?
Dude, this again goes to the concept of like just being pro.
Yes.
So like every time somebody clicks on your podcast, it's an opportunity for them to become a loyal follower or listener or watcher. And I wouldn't call it anxiety, but like when I go to the gym and like I want to like listen to a podcast when I'm at the gym, because I'm a millennial. No, I'm just kidding. But the amount of time I waste just going 10 minutes into this podcast, bro, they're not even getting into the conversation.
Yeah.
Next podcast. And the biggest issue as to why I get frustrated and it makes me not even want to follow their podcasts anymore is because you told me what this podcast was about by your title.
Mm-hmm.
So why the heck are you wasting the time? Just call your podcast, click this, and I will waste your time. and I get it. Some people just want to just like jam and like shoot the.
We are not joking
stuff.
When we say that it was 45 minutes in and they did not mention a word that was mentioned in the title.
Right. So I mean, I'll actually shout out some podcasts that I know for sure, like they're just so good, right? I already talked about Craig Rochelle Leadership Podcast. Just so clear what you're going to get. Jumps right into the content. And I get not everyone is wired in a way to deliver content all the same way. That's not what I'm saying is for you to be a robot. I'm saying to just deliver quickly on the promise of your podcast, okay? So we have that. I love Craig Rochelle. Another leadership podcast that I love is Gerald Brooks. He actually spoke at our church this last weekend. And these people they're very consumable podcasts. Another one I'll shout out is Alex Ramosi, The Game. Like the way he titled Why Branding Makes You Money, the power of repetition in creating success. And I mean, a lot of his information is like, I mean, his podcasts are pretty short, which you can also like, by the way, this is something we're going to test pretty soon here. I think after this month we'll do it. We'll have audio only podcasts just to drive traffic to the audio. So they won't be staple episodes, but they'll definitely be like exclusive audio only episodes.
We actually have a few lined up already.
Yeah, which I'm pumped about.
Yep.
So that's one. Those are some that I love. Dude, someone that like maybe none of you guys know, but her name is Jerisha Hawk. Jerisha Hawk is a business coach, and she's so clear on what her podcast titles are and then her delivery of that information. I love the Money Mondays with Danny Fleischman. Here's what I love about Money Mondays. Money Mondays, he has the same structure of every conversation. He never goes past about 40 something minutes. Like he tries to hard stop at 40 minutes because his thing is most workouts are 40 minutes long. Most commutes to work are 40 minutes long. But every single person he has on his podcast, it's the same 3 questions. How do you make the money? How do you invest the money? How do you give away the money? Doesn't matter who he's interviewing.
Yeah.
So like,
I love that. Expectation.
Yeah, expectation, predictability. Who else? Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, there's, I was talking with Mariella, who's on the team, and she was talking about she's a fan of the Diary of the CEO, and one thing about I was talking to her about this, and she's like, it happens all the time, even with them. And I get it. They have 2-3 hour long podcasts. So like they're picking one thing to highlight in the title, but like you don't get to that thing. And the title is the reason why the person's even wanting to click and watch or listen. So I don't you.
So it's like you
just want to, you just want people to connect that oh man, this is really good. Oh gosh, the power, the anointing, here it comes. When your content is clear, it communicates that you care. So if somebody clicks on your thing and you deliver every time, people will literally feel cared for. Like, thank you. And the resounding response and comment is thank you. Thank you guys for doing this. Omar, thank you for showing us Cassandra. Hey, thank you, Omar. And it's because we put the care up front. But when there's a disconnect, it communicates a lack of care.
Sure.
And it's like, well, if you don't take this serious, if you don't take this intentional, I don't want to be an intentional listener.
Yeah.
Like
the highest form of value is communicated in clarity, I think was the original.
From who?
I think that was from you.
The highest form of value is communicating clearly. What? I don't know. That sounds tight though.
Is communicated in the form of clarity or something like that.
Dude, I'll tell you this as we wrap this up. Shout out to the Content to Cash Challenge sponsoring this episode. All right. No, Myron's daughter, who is brilliant, her name's Dee Dee. She has this, and I'll end with this. She says, the biggest mistake that happens in communication is thinking that it happened. So many of us in this context, we think by titling our episode this, but us talking about this, we think that it's going to communicate this, but that's the biggest mistake. And even when I tell you, when we're having a conversation, we leave the conversation, the biggest mistake is thinking that you actually heard what I was trying to tell you, and that's in anything. That's like in anything. The biggest mistake in communication is believing it actually happened. And we'll just end it with that. Thank you for being on the department. Thank you for listening this far. Go ahead and subscribe where you're listening or watching. Thanks for coming on. Let me do the guest flow dap. Hey. All right.